The red dust of Arizona did not just sit on the skin, it bit into it. It found the creases of the eyes and the corners of the mouth, tasting of iron and ancient, dried blood. Sayona lay flat on her stomach atop the ridge of red mesa, her body pressed so close to the sandstone that she might have been a part of the geology itself. The heat of the rocks seeped through her buckskin shirt, a burning reminder that it was mid-afternoon, likely 3 o'clock or near enough to it. The sun hammered down on the territory, bleaching the color out of the scrub brush and turning the distant mountains into shimmering ghosts of violet and gray. She adjusted the old Winchester rifle in her hands. The wood of the stock was smooth, worn down by her father's hands before it became hers. It was a heavy thing, a model 1873, but she knew its weight like she knew the weight of her own arm. Below her, the canyon floor was a winding scar of dry earth and gravel, punctuated only by the twisted shapes of mesquite and the occasional hardy cactus. This was her home. It was the land of the Chiricahua, or what was left of it after the treaties. The fences and the soldiers from Fort Varnum had redrawn the world with ink and paper. Her hand moved instinctively to her throat, her fingers brushing the cool silver of the pendant that rested there. It was a hawk, wings spread in a dive, hammered from Mexican silver by a silversmith who had died 10 years ago. Her mother had given it to her before the fever took her, whispering that the hawk sees everything, even when the world thinks it is sleeping. Sayona needed the hawk's eyes today. Below, in the dry wash that should have been empty, there were tracks. They were not the unshod prints of ponies, nor the narrow, iron-rimmed wheels of the light army buckboards. These were wide, deep ruts that crushed the sagebrush and ground the stones to powder. Heavy freight wagons, the kind that carried timber, or mining equipment, or enough dynamite to blow the face off a mountain. She pushed herself back from the edge, moving backward like a lizard until she was below the skyline. She sat up, dusting the red grit from her knees. The wind shifted, hot and dry, carrying no scent of rain, only the smell of creosote and sulfur. 2 wagon, she whispered to herself. 6 mules each. She spoke in her own tongue, though she knew enough English to trade and to lie. The tracks were heading east, toward the box canyon where the hidden springs still bubbled deep underground, the last reliable water source her family had access to since the creek near the reservation line had dried up in June. It was 1888, and the government ration of beef had been short for 3 months running. Now, it seemed, they wanted the water too. Sayona stood, crouching low, and moved toward her horse, the mare, a paint with a coat like spilled milk and coffee, waited in the shade of a twisted juniper. Sayona swung up into the saddle, the leather creaking softly. She did not use it a bit. A simple hackamore of braided horsehair was enough. The mare knew her mind. "Quiet now," she murmured, patting the horse's neck. "We go to see what the spider is spinning." The spider was what her father called Harlan Pike. Pike was a man who owned the freight lines, the general store in the settlement of Coyote Wells, and, if the rumors were true, half the officers at Fort Varnum. He was a man who did not move unless money moved with him. Sayona guided the mare down a goat trail that zigzagged the canyon wall, descending into the shadow. The air grew heavier here, trapped between the stone walls. She followed the heavy ruts for 2 miles, keeping to the hard rock and the gravel to hide her own passage. The sun began to dip, casting long, bruised shadows across the valley floor. Ahead, the canyon widened into a bowl, screened by a thicket of willow and cottonwood that drank from the moisture deep beneath the sand. She heard voices before she saw them. Sayona dismounted and tied the mare to a dead branch. She slipped forward, silent as smoke, her moccasins finding the silent places between the dry leaves. She reached the edge of the cottonwoods and peered through the branches. There were 2 wagons, just as the tracks had promised. They were halted near the dry creek bed. Several men were unloading wooden crates, long, rectangular boxes that looked ominously like rifles, and square crates marked with black stenciled letters. But it was the 2 men standing by the lead wagon who drew her attention. One was Harlan Pike. He was a large man, his belly straining against a vest of dark silk, a heavy gold watch chain draped across it like a shackle. He wore a bowler hat, dusty now, and he was sweating profusely, wiping his neck with a stained handkerchief. The other man wore the dusty blue wool of the United States Cavalry. Captain Rourke. Siona felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Rourke was the commander of B Troop at Fort Varnum. He was the man who signed the passes that allowed her people to leave the reservation to hunt. He was the man who swore the Great Father in Washington wanted peace. "It is taking too long. Harlan," Rourke said. His voice was sharp, carrying easily in the still air. "The inspector is due from Santa Fe in 2 weeks. If the survey isn't done by then." "The survey is done when I say it is done, Captain," Pike replied, his voice a gravelly rumble. He reached into the breast pocket of his coat and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. A ledger. Siona narrowed her eyes. It looked like a shopkeeper's book, the kind used to tally sacks of flour and pounds of sugar. Pike tapped the cover of the book with a thick finger. "It is all here, Rourke. Every drop of water in Red Mesa. I have the flow rates, the underground aquifers, and the old Spanish land grant deeds that I acquired. Once this ledger is filed with the territorial office, that water belongs to the Pike Mining Company." "And the Apache?" Rourke asked, though he did not sound concerned. He sounded impatient. "They are trespassing on private industrial land," Pike said, a cruel smile splitting his beard. "You will have the legal authority to move them, for their own safety. Of course, to the barren patch near the salt flats." Siona gripped her rifle until her knuckles turned white. The salt flats? Nothing lived there. It was a death sentence written in ink. "I want the payment recorded in there too," Rourke said, pointing at the book. "My pension needs padding." "It is recorded," Pike said. $4,000, labeled as consultation fees. "It is a watertight business. Captain, just like the fence I am going to build across this canyon. They were stealing the future. They were not using bullets. Not yet. They were using paper. A ledger. That black book held the power to erase her family from this valley as surely as a flood washes away a footprint." Siona shifted her weight, preparing to back away. She had to tell her father. They needed to move, or hide, or fight. But as she moved, her foot landed on a piece of dry driftwood buried in the sand. Crack! The sound was as loud as a pistol shot in the silence of the canyon. Down by the wagon. Captain Rourke spun around, his hand flying to the holster at his hip. "Who is there?" Pike shoved the ledger back into his coat pocket. "Probably a coyote, or one of those stray dogs." "I don't take chances," Rourke snapped. He signaled to 2 of the men unloading the crates. "Check the perimeter. 50 yards out. Shoot anything that moves." Siona froze. If she ran, the noise would give her away. If she stayed, they would find her. She was 20 yards from her horse, but the brush was thin between here and there. Suddenly, from the opposite side of the canyon, high up on the northern rim, a rock tumbled down, clattering loudly against the canyon wall. The soldiers spun toward the new noise. "Over there," one shouted. "Up on the north ridge." Rourke and the men raised their rifles, aiming high toward the distraction. Siona did not waste the miracle. She stayed low and scrambled backward, moving fast and hard while their backs were turned. She reached her mare, untied the reins with trembling fingers, and led the horse deeper into the cut of the ravine before she dared to mount. As she swung into the saddle, she glanced up toward the north ridge. For a split second, silhouetted against the dying purple light of the sky, she saw a rider. He sat on a horse with the ease of a man who lived in the saddle. He wore a flat-brimmed hat. Not a soldier's kepi. He was watching the wagons too. Who was he? Had he knocked the rock loose by accident? Or on purpose? She did not wait to ask. She kicked the mare into a gallop, the soft sand muffling the hoofbeats as she fled toward the safety of the deep desert. The encampment of her father's band was a cluster of wickiups built from brush and canvas, huddled against the base of a sheer cliff that offered protection from the wind. It was dark when Siona returned. The fires were burning low, casting flickering orange light on the faces of her people. There were few fires tonight, wood was scarce, and energy was scarcer. She found her father, Chief Taza, sitting near the central fire. He was an old man now, his skin like crumpled parchment, his eyes clouded with cataracts that stole the world from him by inches every day. Beside him sat her brother, Chaitan. Chaitan was young, 20 years old, and full of a rage that vibrated off him like heat from a stove. "You were gone long," Chaitan said, his voice sharp. "The women need help with the water skins." "There is no water to put in the skins if we do not listen," Siona said, sliding off her horse. She dropped the reins and stepped into the firelight. "I saw Rourke, and the man Pike." Her father raised his head. "Pike, the traitor. He is not a traitor anymore. Father, he is a thief of mountains." Siona knelt beside him. "I saw them in the box canyon. Pike has a book, a black ledger. He says it proves the water belongs to him. He says they will move us to the salt flats." A murmur went through the small circle of elders gathering around. "Paper," Chaitan spat, throwing a stick into the fire. "Always paper. I say we burn the wagons. We kill Pike. The paper burns with him. If we kill Pike, the soldiers will come with Gatling guns," Taza said softly. His voice was weary. "We have 20 rifles. They have an army. So we die of thirst." Chaitan stood up, his hand on his knife. "I would rather die fighting than with a dry tongue." "It is a trick," Siona said, trying to keep her voice steady, though her heart was hammering. "They are stealing it legally. Rourke is helping him. If that ledger goes to the territorial office, it becomes law. The soldiers will just be enforcing the law." "Then we must stop the book," Taza said. He turned his sightless eyes toward her. "But we cannot attack the fort. We cannot attack the wagons while the soldiers are there. We are bound by the treaty." "The treaty is a lie," Chaitan shouted. Siona looked at the fire. She thought of the heavy tracks. She thought of the man on the ridge, the stranger. Why was he watching? "There was someone else," she said. "A rider on the ridge. He saw them too." "A scout?" Chaitan asked. "Maybe. He did not dress like a soldier." Later that night, Siona could not sleep. The air in the wickiup was stifling. She stepped out into the cool night. The moon was a thin sliver, offering little light. She looked toward the east, toward the box canyon. A feeling of dread settled over her, heavy and cold. The ledger. That black book was the key. As long as Pike held it, he held their lives in his pocket. She remembered the look on Pike's face, the greed. She remembered Rourke's betrayal. And then she heard it, distant, muffled by miles of stone and air, but unmistakable to ears trained to hear the snap of a twig at 100 yards. Gunfire, not the rhythmic volley of a drill. This was chaotic. Pop, pop, then the heavier boom of a buffalo gun, then silence. It came from the direction of the box canyon. Siona looked at the sleeping camp. If she woke Chaitan, he would ride out screaming a war cry, and they would all be dead by morning. If she told her father, he would pray. She touched the silver hawk at her throat. The hawk sees everything. She went to the mare. She tightened the cinch. She took a fresh handful of cartridges from the supply sack and thumbed them into the loops of her belt. She had to know. Siona rode out under the cover of darkness, not taking the goat trail this time, but the high rim path that would give her a view. It took her an hour to reach the overlook above the box canyon. When she looked down, the scene had changed. The wagons were still there, but the camp was in chaos. Lanterns were bobbing frantically like fireflies. Men were shouting. "He went east," a voice roared. It sounded like Pike. "He took the saddlebags. Get the horses." "Damn it, he shot serenely," another voice yelled. "The doctor. Get the doctor from the wagon." Siona squinted into the gloom. "Someone had attacked the camp, one man. Don't let him reach the Badlands." Rourke's voice cut through the noise. "If he gets away with that book, Pike, I will hang you myself." "The book," Siona's breath caught. "The rider." The stranger on the ridge. He hadn't just been watching. He had been waiting. He had stolen the ledger. She watched as a group of 5 riders broke away from the wagons, galloping hard toward the east, toward the twisted labyrinth of canyons and hoodoos known as the Devil's Garden. The thief was alone. He was running, and he had the one thing that could save her people or destroy them. But he was riding into a trap. The Devil's Garden was a box canyon with no exit if you didn't know the secret trails. He would be cornered within 10 miles. Sayona made a choice. She did not return to the village. She turned the mare east. She knew the secret trails. She knew where the water was, and where the dead ends were. She was not going to let Harlan Pike get that book back, and she was not going to let the stranger die. At least not until she knew who he was and why he had done what her own brother dared not do. She kicked the mare into a run, the wind whipping her black hair across her face like a veil of war. The hunt was on. The tracks of the galloping horse had vanished into the hardpan of the Devil's Garden, but the blood trail remained. It was a dark, erratic script written on the pale stones, visible only to eyes that knew what to look for under the sliver of the moon. Sayona moved on foot now, leading her mare. The terrain was a nightmare of twisted sandstone pillars and deep, shadowed crevices where a horse could easily break a leg. The wind howled through the rock formations, a mournful sound that masked the crunch of her moccasins against the gravel. She found his horse first. It was a roan gelding, standing with its head low in a box canyon that offered no exit. The animal was shivering, its flanks slick with sweat and blood, but it was still alive. The saddle was empty. One stirrup leather had snapped, dangling uselessly. Sayona tied her mare to a sturdy mesquite bush and moved forward, her Winchester rifle raised and ready. Her heart beat a slow, steady rhythm against her ribs. The fugitive was close. A man did not leave his horse in a country like this unless he could no longer ride. She rounded a pillar of eroded red rock and saw him. He was pressed into a shallow overhang at the base of the cliff, half hidden by a tumble of dead tumbleweeds. He was sitting with his back against the stone, his legs sprawled out in the dust. One hand clutched his side, dark fluid seeping between his fingers. The other hand held a heavy Colt revolver, resting on his knee. Sayona stepped into the moonlight, leveling her rifle at his chest. The man's head snapped up. His face was pale beneath a layer of grime and stubble. He looked to be about 30 years old, with sharp features and eyes that were dark with pain but surprisingly clear. He tried to lift the revolver, but his strength failed him. The heavy gun clattered against the rock, though his hand remained on the grip. "Drop it," Sayona said in English, her voice cold. The man stared at her. He blinked, fighting to focus. He did not let go of the gun, but he did not raise it either. Instead, he looked at her buckskin shirt, her beaded belt, and the rifle in her hands. Then he spoke. "Do not shoot, sister." The words were not English. They were spoken in her own tongue, the dialect of the Chiricahua. The accent was thick, rough around the edges like a stone rolled in a riverbed. But the words were correct. It was not the mocking gibberish soldiers sometimes shouted. It was the formal address of one requesting parley. Sayona lowered the barrel of her rifle an inch, stunned. "You speak the tongue of the people." "I listened," the man rasped, switching back to English as a coughing fit seized him. He grimaced, pressing harder on his side. "I listened when I should have been fighting, and now I'm bleeding." He tried to shift his position, and as he did, he pulled a leather bundle closer to his chest with his free hand. He was guarding it with more desperation than he guarded his own life. "Who are you?" Sayona demanded, taking a step closer. "Cal," he whispered. "Cal Mercer. Mercer, the scout." She knew the name. He was not a soldier, but he had ridden with Crook's column 3 years ago. A man who sold his eyes to the army. "Why should I not finish what the canyon started? Scout?" "Because," Cal gritted out, "Pike is coming, and if you kill me, he wins." Before she could answer, the sound of hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. They were distant, perhaps a quarter of a mile away, but approaching fast. Sayona made her decision in the space of a heartbeat. She could not leave a man who spoke her tongue to be butchered by Harlan Pike's hired guns, regardless of the color of his skin. She rushed forward, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. She grabbed Cal under his arms. "Up! You have to move, Cal groaned, his face twisting in agony. But he forced his legs to work. He was heavier than he looked, a dead weight of muscle and bone. Sayona dragged him away from the overhang, pulling him toward a narrow fissure in the rock wall that she had spotted earlier, a crack barely wide enough for a coyote, leading to a small cave hidden by shadow. She shoved him inside, just as the riders crested the ridge above the box canyon. "Down there!" a voice shouted. It was a rough, gravelly voice. "I see his horse." Sayona crouched beside Cal in the darkness of the cave. The air smelled of dry dust and old bat guano. Cal was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. She pressed her hand over his mouth to silence him. Outside, the riders had reached the roan gelding. She heard the creak of leather and the heavy thud of boots hitting the ground. "He ain't here," a man said. "Just the nag. Saddlebags are empty. He can't have gone far," another voice replied. "He took a hit in the ribs. I saw the blood spray." "Spread out," the first man commanded. "Check the rocks. Pike wants that ledger. He said the water debt has to be settled tonight. If we don't bring back the book or the man, we don't get paid." The water debt. The phrase sent a chill through Sayona. It confirmed everything she had feared. Beside her, Cal slumped sideways, consciousness slipping away. As his body went limp, his hand fell away from his chest. Something metallic clattered against the stone floor of the cave. A ray of moonlight filtered through the crack, illuminating the object. It was not a weapon. It was a silver pendant on a leather thong. Sayona stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. It was a hawk, wings spread in a dive. The etching on the wings was distinct, a pattern of 3 jagged lines representing lightning. She reached up and touched her own throat. The pendant she wore was identical. For a moment, the world stopped. The voices outside faded into a buzz. She grabbed Cal's shirt, shaking him. "Where did you get this?" she hissed, her whisper fierce. "Answer me." Cal's eyes fluttered open. He looked at the silver hawk gleaming in the dust, then up at her face. The confusion in his eyes cleared, replaced by a strange, sorrowful resignation. "Salt River," he murmured. "5 years ago. A woman. She was separated from the band. Smallpox?" Sayona felt a physical blow to her chest. Her aunt, her mother's sister, had vanished during the breakout of '83. They had assumed she was captured or killed by soldiers. "You killed her?" Sayona asked, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. "No," Cal said, his voice barely audible. "Found her. She was dying. Gave her water. Stayed until the end. She gave me that. Said it shouldn't be buried in a hole without a name. Said, keep it until the debt is paid." He looked at her, his gaze steady despite the pain. "I never found who to pay it to." Sayona released her grip on his shirt. Her hand trembled as she picked up the silver hawk. It was warm from his skin. He had not stolen it. He had carried it. He had honored a dying enemy when no one was watching. Outside, the men were moving away. Nothing here but rocks and scorpions. He must have crawled into a hole further up the wash. "Let's ride," the leader growled. "We will cut him off at the pass." The sound of hooves faded into the night, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Sayona looked at Cal. He had passed out again, his head lolling against the stone. He was an intruder. He was a scout who had likely guided soldiers to her people's camps, but he carried the hawk, and he carried the secrets of Harlan Pike. She could not leave him here. It took Sayona 2 hours to get him out of the canyon and onto her mare. She tied his hands to the saddle horn to keep him from falling and led the horse by foot, navigating the treacherous paths back toward Red Mesa. She did not take him to the main circle of the camp. That would be suicide. The young men would kill him before she could speak a word of explanation. Instead, she led the mare to the high caves on the western rim, where the old ones sometimes went to pray, and where Marabia, the healer, kept her solitude. Marabia was awake when they arrived, as if she had been expecting them. She was a woman of 60 winters, her face a map of deep lines, her hair white as snow. She stood by a small fire, throwing sage onto the coals. "You bring a heavy burden." "Daughter of Taza," Marabia said, not looking up from the fire. "He is wounded," Sayona said, lowering Cal from the horse. He needs your medicine. He is white, Marabia observed, her voice devoid of judgment, stating a simple fact. He carried this. Sayona held out the silver hawk. Marabia took the pendant. She ran her thumb over the lightning etching. A softness entered her eyes. Your aunt's spirit has traveled a long road to come back. She looked at Cal, who was groaning on the ground. Bring him inside. The spirits are curious about this one. They laid Cal on a buffalo robe. Sayona cut away his blood-soaked shirt. The bullet had grazed his ribs, tearing a jagged furrow through the muscle but missing the lung. It was a messy wound, but not fatal if the infection could be kept at bay. Marabia worked quickly, cleaning the wound with a poultice of prickly pear cactus and honey. Cal cried out once, thrashing, but Sayona held his shoulders down. Easy, she said, reverting to her own tongue. Be still. Cal's eyes opened, wide and feverish. He looked at her, then at Marabia, and finally at the roof of the cave. He seemed to understand he was safe, and his body became limp. He will live, Marabia said, wiping her hands on a cloth. But he will not ride for a week. He does not have a week, a voice boomed from the entrance of the cave. Sayona spun around. Her brother, Chaitan, stood in the opening, his silhouette blocking the stars. He held a Winchester in one hand and a hunting knife in the other. His chest was heaving, as if he had run all the way from the main camp. I saw the tracks, Chaitan snarled. I smelled the blood. You brought a white devil into our sanctuary, sister. He is not a devil, Sayona said, stepping between her brother and the unconscious man. He is a witness. He is a scout. Chaitan stepped into the firelight, the blade in his hand gleaming. I know his face. He rode with Crook. He hunted Geronimo. He has Apache blood on his hands. And he has Apache silver in his pocket, Sayona shouted back. She held up the pendant. He buried Aunt Nell in. He saved this for us. Chaitan hesitated, looking at the silver hawk. Confusion warred with hatred on his face. A thief can steal silver from a corpse. He speaks our tongue, Chaitan. He warned me. Pike's men are hunting him. If he was our enemy, why would Pike want him dead? Pike kills his own dogs when they stop biting. Chaitan spat. He pushed past Sayona, raising the knife. I will finish him. It is justice. No. Sayona grabbed Chaitan's wrist. He was stronger than her, and he shoved her back. She stumbled, falling against the stone wall. Chaitan loomed over Cal, the knife poised to strike. If you kill me, Cal's voice rasped out, weak but steady. You will never find the book. Chaitan froze. The tip of the knife hovered 3 inches from Cal's throat. Cal was awake. He was looking up at Chaitan with cold defiance. Go ahead, boy. Cut my throat. And when the soldiers come with the eviction order signed by the territorial governor, you can tell them you killed the only man who knew where the proof of fraud was buried. Chaitan's hand trembled. You lie. I stole the ledger, Cal said, coughing. I know every name in it. Rourke, Pike, the surveyor. I hid it in the Devil's Garden before they shot me. No one finds it without me. Chaitan looked at Sayona, then back at Cal. He slowly lowered the knife. Where is it? Safe, Cal said. For now. We should torture it out of him. Chaitan growled. Then you get the location. But you lose the testimony, Cal said. He forced himself to sit up, wincing. A book is just paper to a white judge. You need a white man to stand up in court and swear it is real. You need me. The cave went silent. The fire popped, sending sparks up toward the smoke hole. What do you want? Sayona asked quietly. Cal looked at her. His gaze was intense. I want Pike ruined. He killed a friend of mine 2 days ago. A good man. I am done running, and I am done hiding. I will trade you the ledger and my testimony. In exchange, you keep me alive until I can stand. And if we refuse, Chaitan asked. Then Pike finds the book, or it rots in the desert, and your people lose the water, and I die here. We all lose. Sayona looked at her brother. She saw the rage still simmering in him, but she also saw the fear for their father, for the children, For the future. He speaks the truth. Chaitan, Sayona said. Loyalty is not about the skin. It is about the promise. He kept the hawk. He will keep this word. Chaitan sheathed his knife with a vicious motion. If he lies, I will skin him alive. And you, sister, you will hold the knife. He turned and stormed out of the cave, vanishing into the darkness. Sayona let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She turned to Cal. He was pale, sweating profusely, his reserves of strength completely spent. Did you really hide it? She asked softly. Cal closed his eyes. Yes. Where? You will have to wait until I can ride, he whispered. Trust goes both ways. Sayona. It was the first time he had used her name. It sounded strange on his tongue, yet respectful. Sayona sat beside the fire, feeding it a piece of ironwood. The night was cold, but the heat of the coming conflict was already rising. She looked at the man sleeping on the buffalo robe. She had saved him. She had defied her brother for him. She had tied her fate to his. Tomorrow, the storm will break over Red Mesa, but for tonight, there was only the fire, the breathing of the wounded man, and the silver hawk resting in her palm. She closed her fingers around it, feeling the sharp edges of the wings. They would go back to the Devil's Garden. They would find the book, and they would make Harlan Pike pay for every drop of water he tried to steal. Sleep, Cal Mercer, she whispered into the darkness. Tomorrow, we hunt. The morning sun over the Mogollon Rim was not a gentle thing. It was a hammer of white-hot iron that struck the earth before the dew had even thought to dry. Sayona moved through the fractured landscape of the canyon floor, her moccasins silent on the baking slate. They had left the safety of the caves before dawn, separating from Chaitan and the others. Her brother had taken the main trail to draw off any pursuit, creating a noisy, dusty distraction that would lead Pike's men toward the Badlands. That left Sayona and the wounded white man, Cal Mercer, to slip into the deeper, narrower veins of the earth, following the true scent of the enemy. They had been riding for 4 hours. The heat was rising, shimmering in waves off the red rock walls that towered 200 feet above them. Cal rode behind her. He sat his horse with a grim determination, though Sayona could see the way his knuckles whitened on the reins every time the gelding stepped down hard. The wound in his side, though cleaned and bound by Marabaya, was a fire that would not go out. He did not complain. He did not ask for rest. In the silence of the canyon, that silence spoke louder than boasts. They reached a fork where a spring-fed creek cut through a dense thicket of willow and cottonwood. The water here was cold and clear, a rare mercy in this unforgiving country. We stop here, Sayona said, pulling her mare up. The horses need water, and you are bleeding again. She pointed to the dark spot blooming on the side of his dust-coated shirt. Cal looked down, grimacing. Just a seepage. It will hold. It will hold if we wash it and bind it tight, she countered, sliding from her saddle. Dead men do not testify in court. Cal Mercer. She took the reins of his horse, waiting for him to dismount. He did so stiffly, his boots hitting the sand with a heavy thud. He leaned against the horse for a moment, catching his breath, his face gray beneath the tan. I will scout the rim, Sayona told him. Stay in the cover of the willows. Do not light a fire. She led the horses a little way downstream to drink, then tethered them in the shade. With her rifle in hand, she climbed the steep slope of the canyon wall, moving agilely among the boulders until she found a vantage point. The world below was empty, just rock, sky, and the wheeling shape of a turkey vulture riding the thermals. No dust clouds marked the approach of riders. Pike's men were likely chasing Chaitan's false trail miles to the south. Satisfied, she began her descent. The descent took her a different route, winding through a cluster of boulders that shielded the creek from view until the very last moment. She moved with the instinctive quiet of a hunter, stepping where the sand was packed hard, avoiding the dry twigs. She rounded a large slab of sandstone and pushed through a screen of leafy willow branches. Intending to fill her canteen, she stopped dead. Cal was there. He was standing waist-deep in a small, calm pool formed by the curvature of the creek. He had stripped off his shirt and the bloody bandages. His back was to her. The muscles of his shoulders defined and corded, moving as he splashed water over his face and neck. The water ran down his skin, washing away layers of red dust and dried sweat. He looked different without the armor of his clothes, vulnerable, human. The wound on his side was an angry red gash against his pale skin, a violent punctuation mark on his ribcage. Sayona stood frozen. In her culture, modesty was a quiet law. To come upon a man bathing was a breach of boundaries, an accident that burned the cheeks. She gripped her rifle, her first instinct to turn and vanish back into the rocks before he noticed. But the water splashed loudly, and Cal stiffened. He did not panic. He did not dive for the gun belt that lay on a flat rock 5 feet away. He simply stopped moving. Slowly, deliberately. He turned his head, then his body, until he was facing her. Sayona took a half-step back, her breath hitching. She felt the heat rise in her face, a flush that had nothing to do with the sun. I was checking the perimeter," she stammered, the English words feeling clumsy. "I did not know." She averted her eyes, looking at the willow leaves, at the water, anywhere but at him. "It is all right," Cal said. His voice was calm, low, and steady. It carried no anger, no lewd amusement. "I do not want to frighten you." Sayona remained where she was, caught between the urge to flee and a strange, stubborn rooting of her feet. She was a warrior's daughter. She had seen men unclothed in the sweat lodge ceremonies. She had seen wounds dressed. Why did this feel different? Perhaps because he was the enemy, or perhaps because he was not. "I should go," she murmured, turning slightly. "Sayona." He said the name she had not given him. He must have heard Chayton say it in the cave. She paused, looking back at him. He was standing still in the water, his hands open at his sides, palms up. The water lapped at his waist. He made no move to cover himself, nor did he posture. He simply stood there, existing in the sunlight. "If you want to be sure I am hiding no weapons," he said softly, his eyes locking onto hers. "You can look, but I will not force you." It was a challenge, but not of dominance. It was an offering of absolute transparency. He was stripping away the mystery and the threat. "Here I am," he was saying. Nothing but a man with a hole in his side. Sayona looked. She forced her eyes to travel from the waterline up. She saw the lean stomach, the dark trail of hair, the jagged, ugly wound that was puckered and clean now. She saw the scar on his shoulder from an old arrow, and the tattoo of a cavalry regiment faded on his forearm. She looked at his face, the water dripping from his beard, the eyes that watched her with a profound, quiet respect. For 3 heartbeats. She looked. It was intimate, terrifyingly so. It was a violation of the distance they had kept between them, the distance of race, of war, of history. But in that silence, the distance collapsed. He was not a soldier. He was flesh and blood, capable of bleeding, capable of washing himself in a stream like any creature of the earth. "You have no weapons," she said, her voice finding its strength. "No," Cal agreed. "Just my name. You never gave me yours. Not really. I heard your brother say it, but I want to hear it from you." "Sayona," she said. "Sayona," he repeated. The syllables sounded different when he spoke them, less sharp, more like a song. "My name is Caleb. Caleb Mercer. My mother called me Cal. Cal." She tested the word. It was short, hard, like a stone. "Turn around. Cal," she said, regaining her composure. "I will get the fresh bandages from the saddlebag. Do not bleed on them." She turned and walked back through the willows, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt strange, exposed, yet seen. He had not treated her as a savage, nor as a woman to be leered at. He had treated her as an equal who had the right to verify his harmlessness. When she returned, he was dressed. His shirt was damp where he had tried to wash the worst of the blood out, but he looked human again. He sat on a log, cleaning his revolver. Sayona sat opposite him, taking out a strip of dried meat. She tore it in half and tossed him a piece. "Eat," she commanded. "Then tell me what is in that book that makes a man like Pike sweat in the winter." Cal chewed the tough meat slowly. "It is not just water rights," he said, swallowing hard. "It is a ledger of transactions. Pike isn't just a freighter. He is a broker." "Broker. He buys things that are not for sale," Cal explained. "He buys silence. He buys access. That ledger lists payments to Captain Rourke for security consulting. That means Rourke uses the army to clear land Pike wants for mining. But it is worse than that. There are entries for labor recruitment." Sayona frowned. "What is that?" "Slaves," Cal said, the word hanging heavy in the air. "Not legally, but he pays the fines for drifters and vagrants arrested in town, then forces them to work off the debt in his silver mines. And not just drifters. He has entries for Indian wards. Children taken from families who cannot support them, sent to work schools that Pike owns shares in." Sayona felt a cold rage stiffen her spine. "He sells our children." "He rents them out," Cal corrected grimly. "And Rourke signs the papers saying it is for their own good. If that book gets to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe, Rourke hangs, and Pike loses everything." "Then we must get it," Sayona said. "Where did you hide it?" "I didn't hide it in the rocks," Cal said. "I mailed it." Sayona stared at him. "Mailed it. There is a dead drop a hollow fence post near the old swing station south of here. I put it there. But I couldn't get back to retrieve it before Pike's men cut me off. I was trying to lead them away from it." "Then we go to the swing station," Sayona said, standing up. "It is not that simple," Cal said, holstering his gun. "The station is watched. We need a way that doesn't look like an attack." They mounted up and rode out of the canyon, moving carefully. The terrain opened up into a wider valley, dotted with mesquite and ocotillo. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and bruised purple. They had been riding for an hour when the ground rumbled. It was not thunder. It was the sound of hooves. "Riders," Cal hissed. "3 of them. Coming from the east cut." Sayona looked. 3 men on horseback were emerging from a draw, dusty coats flapping. They were not soldiers. They looked rough, their hats pulled low, rifles resting across their saddles. Horse thieves, or perhaps scouts for Pike. "They have seen us," Sayona said. "We cannot outrun them on these rocks. Your horse is already tired." "Then we don't run," Cal said. He scanned the terrain. "That fissure there, the split rock, if you ride it, they will think you are panicking. They will bunch up to chase. And I will be the rock they trip over." Sayona nodded. She understood the play. She kicked her mare into a gallop, screaming a high, shrill cry of alarm, and veered sharply toward a narrow gap between 2 massive boulders. The 3 riders whooped, seeing a lone woman fleeing. They spurred their horses, ignoring the terrain, greedy for the prize of a good horse and a captive. They converged, riding shoulder to shoulder as they aimed for the gap. Cal dismounted in a smooth motion. Despite the pain in his side, he knelt behind a knee-high scrub of sagebrush, leveled his colt, and waited. The riders thundered past him, their eyes fixed on Sayona. They were 50 yards away, 40, 30. Cal took a breath, let it out, and squeezed the trigger. Bang! The lead rider's horse reared violently as a bullet kicked up the dirt inches from its nose. The rider was thrown, landing hard in the dust. Bang, bang! 2 more shots. One shattered the stock of the second rider's rifle. The other neatly severed the leather rein of the third man's bridle. The horses panicked. The riderless horse bolted sideways, colliding with the others. The man with the broken rein fought to control his mount, spinning in circles. Cal stood up, cocking the hammer of his Colt. "Turn around," he roared, "or the next one takes a button off your shirt." The 2 men still on horseback looked at the kneeling figure of Cal, then at the fallen man who was scrambling to his feet, clutching a dislocated shoulder. They looked at the rifle barrel now poking out from the rocks where Sayona had taken cover. They broke. The 2 riders wheeled their horses and galloped back the way they came, leaving their fallen comrade to limp after them, cursing. Sayona rode back to where Cal stood. He was holstering his gun, his face pale again. "You shoot well for a dying man," she said. "I aim for the things that don't bleed when I can." Cal muttered. "But we have a problem. Those shots will carry. If Pike has men within 5 miles, they know where we are. We need to disappear," Sayona said. "I know a place," a deep voice said from behind them. Sayona spun her horse around, rifle raising. Cal drew his pistol. A man stepped out from the shadow of a large mesquite bush. He was tall, his skin the color of dark obsidian, worn and weathered by the sun. He wore a battered slouch hat and a canvas duster that had seen better decades. He held a shotgun, but it was broken open over his arm, showing he meant no immediate harm. "Easy now," the man said. His voice was like grinding stones, deep and resonant. "I saw that shooting. Pretty work." Cal squinted. Josiah Reed." The man smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "Hello, Cal. You look like you got caught in a barbed wire fence." "Josiah!" Cal lowered his gun, letting out a breath of relief. He looked at Sayona. "It is all right. I know him. He rode with the 10th Cavalry. Buffalo soldier." Sayona did not lower her rifle. "He is a stranger. I am a man who hates Harlan Pike as much as you do, Miss," Josiah said, nodding respectfully to her. "Pike owns the note on my little plot of land. He charges me double for water and threatens to burn me out every Tuesday." "He is watching the pass," Cal said. "He is doing more than watching," Josiah said, walking closer. "I was fixing the fence line on the south ridge. I saw his wagons. They are not just moving supplies. They are moving ammunition, cases of it, and something else." "What?" Sayona asked. "I have a cousin who works in the dispatch office at the fort," Josiah said. "He told me the patrol schedule for tomorrow night, the night of the full moon, is blank. No patrols from Red Mesa to the river. They are clearing the board," Cal said, his eyes darkening. "They are going to hit the camp tomorrow night. Pike bragged in the saloon that he would have the water rights settled by Sunday," Josiah added. "He has a crew of hard cases gathering at Coyote Wells. 20 men. Sayona felt the blood drain from her face. 20 men against my father's old rifles. It will be a massacre." "Not if we stop it," Cal said. He looked at Sayona. "We cannot go back to the canyon to dig up the ledger. It is too far. If we ride on the ledger, the attack happens while we are gone." "Then what do we do?" Sayona asked. "We need proof." "The ledger is the original proof," Cal said. "But Pike keeps a copy of his shipping manifest in his office in Coyote Wells, and that is where the attack will be launched from. Coyote Wells is a fortress," Josiah warned. "Every second man there works for Pike. We don't need to fight them all," Sayona said, her mind racing. She looked at Cal. "You know the town, you know the office." "I do." "And I know the back trails," Josiah said. "I can get you into town through the old mine drainage tunnel. It comes out right behind the livery stable." Sayona looked at the 2 men. One was white, one was black. Both were outcasts in this land, just as she was becoming. "We go to Coyote Wells," Sayona decided. "We steal the manifest, and we stop the attack before it starts." Cal nodded. He climbed back onto his horse, wincing. "One thing, Josiah, do you have any tobacco?" Josiah chuckled, reaching into his pocket. "I might have a pouch, but it will cost you a story about how you got that hole in your side." As they rode south, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the desert into a sudden, cooling twilight. Sayona rode beside Cal. She watched him strike a match on his saddle horn to light the cigarette Josiah had rolled for him. The flare of the match illuminated his face for a second, the weary lines, the determination. She thought of the moment in the stream, the water running over his skin, the way he had offered her his vulnerability as a weapon against her fear. She felt a pull toward him that frightened her more than Pike's guns. It was not just gratitude, it was a recognition. He was broken, like the land was broken, but he was still standing. "Sayona," Cal said softly, breaking her reverie. "When we get to town, stay close to me. People there, they are not kind to you. I have my rifle," she said. "Sometimes," Cal said, looking at the distant lights of the town appearing on the horizon like fallen stars. A rifle is not enough. Sometimes you have to be a ghost. Then we will be ghosts, she said. They rode on into the gathering dark, 3 shadows against the vast indifference of the American West, riding toward a town built on bones and silver, to steal a piece of paper that could save a nation. Coyote Wells was not a town. It was a scar on the desert floor, festering with the infection of commerce. It smelled of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, copper tang of cheap whiskey. To Siona, riding in from the clean silence of the high mesas. The noise was a physical blow, the clanging of the blacksmith's hammer, the shriek of a train whistle, and the low, constant murmur of men seeking profit or oblivion. She pulled the rough wool of her cloak tighter around her shoulders. Underneath, she had traded her buckskins for a faded calico dress stolen from a clothesline outside a miner's shack miles back. But she kept her moccasins. Boots were too loud, and she needed to feel the earth if she had to run. A wide-brimmed straw hat, pulled low, hid her eyes and the heavy braid of her hair. "Keep your head down," Cal murmured. He was walking beside their horses, leading them toward the hitching rail outside the Dusty Spur Saloon. He looked different, too. He had rubbed grease into his face to darken his beard and walked with an exaggerated limp, playing the part of a broken-down drifter looking for day labor. "To them! You are just a Mexican washerwoman or a mute wife, if anyone asks. You don't speak English." "I do not want to speak to them at all," Siona whispered back. Her hand rested on the hidden knife beneath the folds of her skirt. They tied the horses in the shadows of the livery stable, away from the gas lamps that illuminated the main street. The town was awake, fueled by the silver boom. "Pike will be at the saloon," Cal said, checking the load in his revolver one last time before tucking it into his waistband, hidden by his coat. "It is his court. He likes an audience." They pushed through the swinging doors of the Dusty Spur. The air inside was thick enough to chew, layered with tobacco smoke and the smell of sawdust and stale beer. A piano player was hammering out a tinny, frantic tune in the corner, competing with the roar of laughter from the poker tables. Siona followed Cal to the back of the room, finding a small table in the shadows. She felt the eyes of the men slide over her, heavy, assessing, dismissive. To them, she was not a person. She was scenery, or perhaps livestock. The injustice of it burned in her throat like bile, but she swallowed it. She was here for the ledger. "There," Cal whispered, nodding imperceptibly toward the bar. Harlan Pike stood at the center of a group of men, holding a glass of amber liquid. He looked even larger here than he had in the canyon, his presence dominating the room. His laughter was a boom of thunder. "I tell you, gentlemen," Pike bellowed, his voice carrying over the piano. "By tomorrow's sunrise, the water issue is settled. The Army is finally seeing reason. 1 night of work, and Red Mesa will be open for business. No more savages blocking the progress of the railroad." Siona's grip on the table edge tightened until the wood groaned. 1 night. That meant tonight. The attack was imminent. "Stay here," Cal said softly. "I see someone I know." He didn't move toward Pike. Instead, he drifted toward a small, nervous-looking man sitting alone at a corner table, nursing a beer. The man wore a clerk's visor and ink-stained cuffs. Siona watched as Cal sat down opposite the man. She could not hear their words, but she saw the clerk whose name she would later learn was Finch jump as if he had been stung. Finch looked terrified. He whispered frantically, glancing toward Pike. Cal leaned in, his face hard, asking questions. Finch shook his head, then nodded, and finally, he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table to Cal. Cal took the paper, glanced at it, and shoved it into his pocket. He stood up to leave, but as he turned, a shadow fell across his path. A tall, spindly man with a face like a hatchet had stepped away from the bar. He wore 2 guns tied low on his thighs. He was staring at Cal with a look of dawning recognition. "Well, I will be damned," the gunman drawled. The piano music seemed to stutter and die as the tension in the room spiked. "If it isn't Cal Mercer..." Cal froze. He kept his hands away from his coat. "Hello, Grady," It has been a long time. Not long enough, Grady said, stepping closer. He looked at the men around him, grinning. You boys know who this is. This is the man who led the cavalry into Skeleton Canyon 3 years ago. The man who convinced the chiefs to come in for a parley, right before the army shot them down under a flag of truce. Sayona felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Cal. He did not deny it. His jaw was set like granite. I was a scout, Grady, Cal said, his voice flat. I didn't give the order to fire. You led them there, Grady spat. You earned your blood money, and then you got soft. You disappeared. Grady's hand hovered over his pistol. Pike has a bounty out for a horse thief who hit his convoy yesterday. I reckon that is you. Pike turned at the commotion. His eyes narrowed. Mercer, seize him. The room erupted. Cal didn't go for his gun. He grabbed a heavy whiskey bottle from the nearest table and smashed it across Grady's face. The gunman went down in a spray of glass and blood. Run, Cal roared, looking at Sayona. Sayona didn't need to be told twice. She kicked her table over, sending it crashing into the legs of 2 men rushing toward her. She bolted for the back door, the kitchen entrance. Cal was right behind her. A bullet splintered the door frame as they burst into the alleyway. The cool night air hit them, but there was no safety here. Shouts echoed from the street. The roof, Cal shouted, pointing to a stack of crates against the wall of the general store. They scrambled up the crates, Cal groaning as the exertion tore at his healing wound. Sayona reached the top first and pulled him up. They ran across the flat tar-papered roof, jumping the narrow gap to the next building. Below them, men were pouring out of the saloon like angry ants. He is on the roof! Get the rifles! Pike's voice was a clarion call of violence. Why did you not tell me? Sayona hissed as they crouched behind a brick chimney. Skeleton Canyon, you led my uncle into that trap. Cal looked at her, his face streaked with sweat and guilt. I thought it was a peace talk. Sayona, I swear it. I didn't know the colonel had orders to fire until the first shot. I have been trying to outrun that day for 3 years. You cannot outrun blood, she said coldly. But she did not leave him. They were bound now by immediate survival. The train, Cal gasped, pointing toward the rail yard at the edge of town. Finch told me the ledger is on the midnight supply train to the fort. It leaves in 10 minutes. That paper he gave me. It is the transfer order. It proves Rourke signed for the delivery. They scrambled down a drain pipe on the far side of the hotel, dropping into a narrow alley filled with trash. They were 2 blocks from the train station. As they emerged from the alley, a wagon rattled around the corner, cutting off their path. It was a heavy freight wagon, driven by a man with a shotgun. It was not one of Pike's men. Get in, a deep voice boomed. It was Josiah Reed. He kicked the brake release, and the wagon lurched forward. Sayona and Cal threw themselves into the back of the wagon, burying themselves under a pile of canvas tarps and hay. Hold on, Josiah yelled. He cracked the whip, and the mules surged forward. Hey, stop that wagon, a sheriff's deputy shouted from the boardwalk. Just delivering grain to the depot, Sheriff Josiah shouted back, not slowing down. These mules are spooked by the gunfire. He drove the wagon hard through the dusty streets, turning sharply toward the loading docks of the train station. The train was there, a massive black iron beast, huffing steam, ready to depart. Josiah pulled the wagon up alongside a line of boxcars. This is as close as I can get you, he said, looking back. The ledger is in the mail car, second from the engine. It has a red stripe. Cal and Sayona crawled out from the canvas. Josiah, Cal said, gripping the man's arm. Thank you. Don't thank me, Josiah said, his face grim. Just remember the deal. My wife and my boy. You get that book, you clear my debt. I promise, Cal said. They dropped from the wagon and sprinted across the gravel yard. The train whistle blew, a long, lonely shriek that signaled departure. The wheels began to turn, grinding steel against steel. We have to jump it, Sayona yelled. They ran alongside the moving train. The mail car was ahead, its sliding doors shut tight. But the coal tender behind the engine had a ladder. Cal reached it first. He grabbed the iron rungs and swung himself up. He reached down for Sayona. "Take my hand," she lunged, grabbing his wrist. He pulled her up just as the train picked up speed, leaving the town of Coyote Wells behind. They collapsed on top of the coal pile, breathing hard. The wind rushed over them, carrying sparks from the smokestack. "We are on," Cal said. "Now we have to get inside." They crawled over the shifting coal toward the front of the tender. Below them, the coupling between the tender and the mail car rattled dangerously. Cal dropped down onto the small platform between the cars. The door to the mail car was locked. He drew his revolver and used the butt to smash the small glass window in the door. He reached through, unlocked the latch, and slid the door open. They tumbled inside. The car was filled with sacks of mail and crates. A single lantern swung from the ceiling, casting dizzying shadows. Sitting at a small desk at the far end was a clerk, not Finch, but a burly man with a mustache. Reading a newspaper, the clerk looked up, startled. He reached for a shotgun leaning against the wall. Sayona was faster. She crossed the car in 3 strides and kicked the shotgun away before he could raise it. She leveled her knife at his throat. "Sit," she commanded. The man froze, hands raising. "I don't have the safe key, the conductor has it." "We don't want money," Cal said, stepping forward. "We want the package for Captain Rourke, from Harlan Pike." The clerk's eyes darted to a leather satchel sitting on the desk. Cal grabbed the satchel and ripped it open. Inside was the black ledger. He pulled it out, flipping through the pages. "This is it," he breathed. "The payments, the names. It is all here." "We have it," Sayona said, a surge of triumph filling her chest. "Now we jump," but the train began to slow. The brakes squealed, throwing them off balance. "Why are we stopping?" Sayona asked. Cal looked out the side door. His face went pale. "We are not stopping. We are being boarded." Riders were galloping alongside the train. Pike's men. They must have telegraphed ahead or ridden hard to cut off the tracks at the ravine crossing. "They know we are here," Cal said. He looked at the ledger, then at Sayona. He did something she did not expect. He ripped the back cover off the ledger, took the folded transfer order he had gotten from Finch, and stuffed the loose paper into Sayona's belt. Then he handed her the ledger. "Take it," he said. "What are you doing?" "The bridge is coming up," Cal said quickly. "The train has to slow down for the curve. You jump there, you take the book and you run to the river, follow the dry wash back to Red Mesa. And you?" "I am going to the engine," Cal said. "I will hold them off. I will make sure the train keeps moving so they chase me. Not you." "No," Sayona grabbed his arm. "We fight together. There are too many of them." "Sayona," Cal shouted over the noise of the brakes. "You are the only one who can save your people. You are the daughter of a chief. I am just a scout who made a mistake 3 years ago. Let me fix it." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Please, let me be the man you thought I was in the stream, not the man in the canyon." The train shuddered. Bullets began to thud against the wooden walls of the mail car. Cal didn't wait for her answer. He kissed her forehead, a brief, desperate contact, and then he turned and ran toward the front of the car, leaping across the gap to the coal tender, drawing his gun. "Come and get me, you sons of bitches!" Cal roared into the night, firing at the riders. The riders turned their attention to the shouting madman on the coal tender. Sayona stood at the open door of the mail car. The ground was blurring past, but slowing. The curve was approaching. She clutched the ledger to her chest. She could jump. She could vanish into the dark and save her family. That was her duty. That was her vow. But she looked at Cal. He was silhouetted against the sparks, fighting a war he could not win alone. He was buying her life with his own. He was not just a white man. He was the man who had asked permission to let her see him. He was the man who had kept her aunt's hawk. Loyalty is not about the skin. Sayona made her choice. She did not jump into the dark. She turned and climbed the ladder to the roof of the mail car. She pulled her Winchester from her back. She lay flat on the roof, the wind tearing at her dress. She lined up her sights on the lead rider who was aiming a rifle at Cal's back. Bang! The rider fell. Cal spun around, looking up. He saw her. "I told you to go," he screamed. "I am an Apache," Sayona shouted back, cocking the lever of her rifle. "We do not leave our debts unpaid." She fired again and again. The train picked up speed as it cleared the curve, the engine groaning. Together, they drove the riders back into the night, leaving the pursuit behind in a cloud of steam and dust. They were alive. They had the book. And now, they were both running toward a war that would end only when one side was broken. Sayona climbed down to the tender, sliding next to Cal. He was bleeding from a fresh cut on his cheek, but he was smiling, a wild, terrified, beautiful smile. "You are stubborn," he said. "And you are a fool," she replied, handing him a strip of cloth from her dress to wipe his face. "But you are my fool now, Cal Mercer." The train hurled itself into the darkness, carrying them toward Red Mesa, toward the dawn, and toward the reckoning that awaited them. The wind that evening did not cool the earth. It scoured it. It whipped through the canyons of Red Mesa, carrying the scent of dry sage and the heavier, metallic tang of an approaching storm. But the clouds gathering in the west were not bringing rain. They were bringing men. Sayona rode the exhausted mare up the final incline to the camp, Cal and Josiah flanking her. The settlement was quiet, the cooking fires burning low, the dogs sleeping in the dust. It was a peace that felt brittle, like a dry twig ready to snap. They dismounted near the central fire. Taza, the chief, was already awake, sensing the disturbance in the earth before he heard the hoofbeats. Chayton emerged from the shadows, his rifle in hand, his eyes narrowing as he saw Cal Mercer still alive and riding freely. "You bring him back," Chayton spat, stepping forward. "And a stranger." "We bring the truth," Sayona said, her voice hoarse from the dust. She pulled the battered black ledger from her belt and slammed it onto the flat stone used for grinding corn. "It is all here. Father, Pike has bought the water, and he has bought the soldiers to clear us out." Taza reached out, his blind eyes tracing the leather cover of the book. "Paper," he murmured. "It is always paper." "It is not just paper," Cal said, stepping into the light. He looked ragged, the bandage on his side stained fresh red. But he stood straight. "It is a death warrant, but it is also a shield. If this book reaches Santa Fe, Pike goes to prison. Santa Fe is 3 days away." Chayton sneered. "Pike is 3 miles away. I saw his dust on the horizon. He comes tonight." "Yes," Cal said. "He comes tonight because he knows the ledger is missing. He has to wipe out this camp before dawn. If there are no witnesses, there is no crime." A murmur of fear rippled through the gathered elders. "We fight," Chayton declared, raising his rifle. "We ambush them in the Narrows. We kill them all." "No," Sayona said sharply. "They have a Gatling gun, Chayton, and 20 men. If we fight them head on, we lose the women. We lose the children. We lose the future. Then what?" Chayton challenged her. "We run like rabbits. We move like ghosts," Sayona said. She looked at her father. "The hidden canyon to the north, the one Mother showed me, it is too narrow for wagons, too steep for their horses. We take the people there. We leave the camp empty. They will burn the wickiups," Taza said sadly. "Let them burn wood and canvas." Sayona said fiercely, "We keep the blood in our veins." "And who holds them off while the old ones climb?" Chayton asked. "Who buys the time?" "I will," Cal said. Chayton laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You, the scout. You will turn your gun on us the moment the soldiers appear." Cal walked forward until he was standing chest to chest with Chayton. The firelight danced in his eyes. 3 years ago," Cal said, his voice carrying to the edge of the circle, "I led a column of soldiers into Skeleton Canyon. I was told it was for a parley. I told the chiefs they would be safe. When the firing started, I watched good men die because I was blind to the treachery of my own people." The camp went deadly silent. Even Chayton looked stunned by the admission. "I cannot bring back the dead of Skeleton Canyon," Cal continued. "But tonight, I can make sure no more die in Red Mesa. I know how Rourke thinks. I know how Pike fights. I will hold the line. He looked at Siona. "Take your people. Go." "I stay with him," Josiah said, checking the load in his shotgun. "Pike owes me a debt. I intend to collect it in advance." Taza stood up. He placed a hand on Siona's shoulder. "Lead the people, daughter. The hawk must guide the flock." The evacuation began immediately. It was a silent, desperate shuffle. Mothers strapped babies to their backs. Old men leaned on walking sticks. They carried only water and dried meat, leaving behind the heirlooms, the blankets, and the history of a decade. Siona organized the line, her heart breaking with every tent flap that was tied shut. She directed them toward the narrow fissure in the north wall, a crack in the earth that looked like a shadow but opened into a winding escape route. She was helping a young mother lift a child over a fallen log when the first explosion tore the night apart. Boom! The ground shook. A plume of fire erupted near the horse corral. Dynamite. "They are here!" Chayton shouted from the rear guard. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed, tearing at their tethers. Women shrieked. The sound of gunfire, crack, 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 echoed off the canyon walls like hail on a tin roof. "Go move," Siona yelled, pushing the line forward. "Do not look back." She looked back. Through the smoke and the rising flames, she saw figures swarming the southern perimeter. They were not in uniform. They wore dusters and masks, but they moved with military precision, Pike's mercenaries, and leading them, riding a massive black horse through the burning remnants of the corn patch, was Harlan Pike. He was shouting orders, pointing toward the fleeing villagers. Siona raised her Winchester. She had a clear line of sight. Pike was illuminated by the fire of a burning wickiup. One shot, she could end the spider right here. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The hate in her blood was a hot, screaming thing. For the water, for the insults, for fear. But then, a cry pierced the din. To her left, a small child, a girl of no more than 5 winters, was cowering behind a water barrel. The girl's mother had been pushed forward in the crush and separated. The child was frozen, staring at the galloping horses bearing down on her. Siona looked at Pike. Then she looked at the child. The ledger is the weapon, she thought. The gun is only a tool. She lowered the rifle from Pike's chest. She sprinted across the open ground, bullets kicking up puffs of red dust around her feet. She scooped the child up in one arm, feeling the small, trembling body cling to her. Hold tight, Siona whispered. She dove behind a rock just as a rider thundered past, swinging a torch. She waited for the hoofbeats to fade, then scrambled up the slope toward the secret canyon entrance. She handed the child to her mother, who was weeping with relief. Take them up, Siona ordered Chayton, who was guarding the entrance. Collapse the trail behind you if you have to. And you? Chayton asked. I have to make sure the door is closed, she said. She turned back toward the fire and the ruin, down in the center of the camp. Cal and Josiah had turned a supply wagon on its side to create a barricade. They were pinned down, taking heavy fire from 3 directions. Cal was firing his Colt with methodical precision, wasting no shots. Josiah was reloading his shotgun, his face grim. We are almost out of ammunition, Josiah yelled over the roar of the fire. We just need 5 more minutes, Cal shouted back. The inspection patrol, they should be here. If they are coming at all. Suddenly, the firing from the enemy line stopped. A voice boomed out. Mercer, I know you are behind that wagon. It was Captain Rourke. He stepped out from behind a burning tent, wearing his blue uniform coat unbuttoned, a pistol in his hand. He looked like a man drunk on power. Give me the ledger, Cal, Rourke shouted. Give it up, and I will let the darky live. You can even walk away. We were comrades once. Remember? Cal stood up slowly from behind the wagon. He held his hands out, empty. I remember. Rourke, Cal said, his voice steady. I remember you swore an oath to the Constitution, not to a mining company. Rourke laughed. The Constitution doesn't pay for a retirement villa in San Francisco. Pike does. Now, where is the book? It is gone, Cal said. It is halfway to the mountains. Rourke's face twisted in fury. He raised his pistol. Then you are useless to me. Goodbye. Scout. Captain Rourke. The voice came from the darkness beyond the light of the fires. It was a voice of absolute, iron authority. Rourke froze. From the shadows of the eastern ridge, a troop of cavalry emerged. But these were not the ragtag men of Fort Varnum. Their uniforms were crisp, their sabers shining. At their head rode a man with the golden oak leaves of a major on his shoulders, the Inspector General from Santa Fe. Beside the major rode the nervous clerk, Finch. Drop your weapon. Captain, the major commanded. Rourke stared, his mouth opening and closing. Major, sir, this is not what it looks like. These savages, they attacked a civilian supply train. Save it for the court-martial, the major said coldly. Mister, Finch telegraphed me yesterday, and we have been watching from the ridge for 20 minutes. I saw who lit the fires. Rourke, and I heard you barter for a bribe. Pike, seeing the tide turn, tried to wheel his horse and flee toward the desert. Not today, Josiah roared. Josiah snatched a burning brand from the wagon wreckage and hurled it. The flaming wood struck the rump of Pike's horse. The animal reared violently. Throwing Pike, the heavy man hit the ground hard, before he could scramble to his feet. Siona was there. She stepped out of the smoke, her rifle leveled at his head. Pike looked up at her, his face gray with shock. You cannot shoot me. I am a citizen. I have rights. Siona looked down at him, the firelight reflected in the silver hawk at her throat. You have the right to silence, she said in perfect, cold English. She did not shoot. She smashed the butt of her rifle into his temple. Pike crumbled into the dust, unconscious. The battle was over. The inspector's troops moved in, disarming Pike's mercenaries and arresting Rourke. The sounds of violence were replaced by the sounds of commands and the crackle of dying fires. Siona stood amidst the ruin of her home. The wickiups were ash. The winter stores were scattered. The earth was scarred. But looking up toward the North Canyon, she knew her people were alive. She felt a presence beside her. Cal was there. His face was blackened with soot, his shirt torn, and he was leaning heavily on a piece of wagon timber, his leg favoring the side of his wound. He looked exhausted, beaten, and utterly alive. They did not embrace. The air was too heavy for that. They stood 2 feet apart, separated by culture and history, but bridged by the blood and ash of the night. You came back, Siona said softly. I had a debt to pay, Cal replied. He looked at the unconscious form of Pike, then at the major shouting orders. Is it paid? Siona looked at the silver hawk around her neck, then at the man who had carried it for 5 years. The debt is paid, she said. Cal reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently touched her arm. It was a tentative, brief contact, but it sent a shock through her that silenced the noise of the soldiers. You are still here, he whispered. I am still here, she answered. The major rode over to them, looking down from his high horse. You are the daughter of Taza. I am, Siona said. I have the ledger, the major said, tapping his saddlebag. And I have the witnesses. Pike and Rourke will face justice, but... He looked around at the burned camp. I cannot let your people stay here. This is still a designated conflict zone until the investigation is complete. You will have to move to the agency at San Carlos temporarily. San Carlos, the desolate flats. Siona felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. They had won the battle. They had saved the truth, but they had still lost their home. We will go, Siona said, her chin raised high. But we will return. The water is ours. The book proves it. The court will decide that, the major said, not unkindly. But for now, pack what you can. The sun began to crest over the eastern mountains, painting the smoke-filled sky in hues of violent pink and gold. It was a new day, but it was a hard one. Siona turned to Cal. And you, where will you go? Cal looked at the soldiers, then at the open desert. I am done running. Siona, I have to testify. I have to finish this. Then we walk the same road a little longer, she said. She turned and walked toward the secret canyon to call her people down from the rocks. They would walk out of Red Mesa not as victims, but as survivors who had forced the white world to listen. And as she walked, she heard the limping step of Cal Mercer behind her, matching her rhythm, step for step. The journey to the Dragoon Mountains was not a march of triumph. It was a slow, dusty procession of survival. They moved under the cover of the twilight and the early morning, resting during the savage heat of the day. A ribbon of 60 souls winding through the fractured landscape of southern Arizona. They set up the temporary camp in a box canyon fed by a seasonal spring, hidden behind a fortress of granite boulders that looked like the teeth of a sleeping giant. It was a difficult place, lacking the softness of the Red Mesa Valley. But it was safe. The wind here smelled of pine resin and cold stone, a sharp contrast to the sulfur and smoke they had left behind. Sayona spent the first 3 days in a state of numb efficiency. She was everywhere at once, organizing the rationing of the dried meat, directing the men to dig latrines downstream from the water source, and helping the women weave temporary shelters from yucca and canvas tarps provided by the army escort that had seen them to the border of the safe zone. She worked until her hands were blistered and her muscles burned, trying to outrun the anger that simmered in her gut. They were alive, yes, but they were refugees in their own land. Every time she looked at the horizon, toward the north where Red Mesa lay empty and silent, she felt a phantom pain, like a limb that had been severed. "Rest, daughter of Taza," Marabaya said on the 4th evening. The old healer was grinding mesquite beans into flour on a flat stone. "The earth will still be here tomorrow. You do not need to hold it up all by yourself." Sayona sank down onto a log, wiping the sweat from her forehead with her sleeve. "If I stop, I start thinking about the fire, about the wickiups burning." "Fire clears the brush so new grass can grow," Marabaya said, her voice rhythmic with the grinding stone. "It is the way of things." Across the clearing, near the makeshift corral, Cal Mercer was working. He had not left. The Inspector General had offered him a ride back to Fort Huachuca, a bed in the infirmary, and a hot meal. Cal had refused. He had stayed with the column, riding at the rear guard with Josiah, eating the same meager rations of jerky and parched corn. Now, he was helping Chayton repair a broken axle on the single wagon they had managed to salvage. Cal's movements were stiff. The wound in his side was healing, but it still pulled tight with every exertion. He worked in silence, using a stone to hammer a heated iron rim back into shape. Sayona watched him. He did not give orders. He did not try to explain the white man's way to the young warriors who watched him with suspicion. He simply worked. He carried water. He gathered wood. He was useful. Chayton stood beside him, holding the wheel steady for days. Chayton had not spoken a word to the scout, communicating only in grunts and sharp gestures. Cal paused, wiping his hands on a rag. He pointed to the alignment of the wood spokes. He said something low. Chayton frowned, looked at the wheel, then nodded. He handed Cal a wedge of hardwood. They worked in tandem. 2 men who hated each other's histories but needed the wheel to turn. "Your brother learns," Marabaya observed. Following Sayona's gaze, "He sees that the white man sweats the same color as he does. Sweat is cheap," Sayona murmured. "Trust is expensive." "He bought it," Marabaya said, "with blood." 2 days later, Cal and Josiah rode out to meet the federal marshal at the designated rendezvous point. A lonely stagecoach stopped 10 miles east. They returned at sunset, their horses coated in white dust. Sayona met them at the edge of the camp. "What is the news?" Cal dismounted slowly. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes etched deep by the glare of the sun, but his shoulders were lighter. "It is done," Cal said. He pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag. "This is a copy of the deposition. Josiah and I swore to it before the judge. The ledger is in evidence lockup in Tucson. And Pike. Indicted," Cal said. "Fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The mining company has already disavowed him. They claim he was a rogue agent. He is sitting in a cell, and his bail is set at $50,000. He won't be paying for it. And Rourke. Court-martial," Josiah added, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. Stripped of command, he is singing like a canary to save his own neck, blaming everything on Pike. So we can go home? Siona asked, hope flaring in her chest. Cal hesitated. He looked at the ground, then at her. Not yet. The legal process is slow. The Department of the Interior has frozen the land status of Red Mesa. No one can enter, not Pike, not the miners, and not your people until the survey is verified. It could take 6 months, maybe a year. Siona felt the bitterness rise again. A year. We are to live on these rocks for a year because white men need to read papers. It is the law, Siona, Cal said gently. It is cold, and it is slow, but it is better than the Gatling gun. The land is safe. Pike cannot touch the water. It will be waiting for you. Justice? She spat the word. It tastes like ash. It tastes like survival, Cal corrected her. You won the war. Siona, now you have to survive the peace. That night, the air was cold. The elevation of the Dragoon Mountains brought a chill that bit through the thin blankets. Siona could not sleep. She sat by the embers of the main fire, wrapping her arms around her knees. The camp was silent, save for the occasional cry of a coyote and the soft breathing of the sleepers. She heard footsteps. Soft, booted steps that tried to be quiet. Cal emerged from the darkness. He held a tin cup in his hand. Coffee, he offered. It is mostly chicory and bad water, but it is hot. Siona nodded. He poured some into her cup and sat down on a stone opposite her, keeping a respectful distance. The firelight played across his face, softening the sharp angles. You should be resting, she said. Your side? My side is fine, Cal said. It aches when it rains, and it aches when it's dry. I am getting used to it. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the wood turn to orange coals. It was a comfortable silence, born of shared adrenaline and exhaustion. Why do you stay? Siona asked suddenly. The ledger is delivered. Your testimony is given. You are a free man. You could go to California. You could disappear. Cal looked into the fire. I tried disappearing. For 3 years. I was a ghost. I rode from town to town, drank whiskey, and tried to forget the sound of the guns in Skeleton Canyon. It didn't work. He looked up at her. Freedom isn't just about not being in a cell. Siona, freedom is being able to look in a mirror. I couldn't do that until 3 nights ago. And now, I see a man who made a few things right. Cal said, not everything, but enough to sleep. Siona touched the silver pendant at her throat. The hawk. She unclasped the leather thong and held the pendant in her hand, the silver warm from her skin. You said you got this from a woman at Salt River, Siona said. 5 years ago. Yes. Cal nodded. She was trapped in a box canyon during a flash flood. Her horse had broken a leg. She was trying to climb out, but she was weak, starving. Maybe. What did you do? I had a spare mount, Cal said quietly. I gave it to her. And my canteen. I told her which way the patrol was moving so she could go the other way. Siona's eyes filled with sudden tears. She remembered that year. She remembered her mother coming home, gaunt and sun-blistered, riding a cavalry horse with a UD's brand on its flank. Her mother had never spoken of how she got it, only that a spirit had interceded. She was not just a woman, Siona whispered. She was my mother. Cal went still. He stared at her, his eyes widening. Your mother? She told us a spirit saved her, Siona said, a tear tracing a line through the dust on her cheek. She said the spirit had blue eyes and a sad face. She gave you the hawk because it protects travelers. She wanted you to find your way home. Cal looked at the pendant in her hand as if it were a holy relic. I kept it, he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. I didn't know why. I couldn't sell it. I couldn't lose it. It felt like a promise I hadn't kept yet. You kept it, Siona said. She reached out and took his hand. His palm was rough, calloused, but his touch was gentle. She placed the pendant in his palm, then closed his fingers over it. No, Cal tried to pull away. It is yours. It is your family's. It is a circle, Siona said firmly. She gave it to you to save her life. You brought it back to save mine. And now, she paused, looking at him with an intensity that made the rest of the world fade away. Now the debt is gone. There is no debt between us. Cal Mercer, only what we choose. Cal looked at her hand covering his. He did not pull away this time. He turned his hand over, intertwining his fingers with hers. It was not a lover's grasp, not yet. It was an anchor. Two people holding on to each other in a world that wanted to sweep them away. What do we choose? Cal asked, his voice barely a whisper. We choose tomorrow, Siona said. They sat there as the fire died down, hand in hand. There was no need for kisses, no need for the desperate, hurried passion of people who think they are about to die. This was the slow, steady burn of people who intended to live. The next morning, the camp was buzzing with a different kind of energy. The fear had receded, replaced by the mundane tasks of long-term survival. Chayton approached Cal near the water barrels. The young warrior looked at the white man, then at the axe Cal was holding. The woodpile is low, Chayton said in English. It was the first time he had spoken the language to Cal. I was just heading out to chop some mesquite. Cal replied. Chayton nodded. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small pouch of tobacco. He tossed it to Cal. Josiah says you smoke too much. Chayton grunted. But if you're going to chop wood for my sister's fire, you should not be distracted by wanting a smoke. Cal caught the pouch, a slow smile spreading across his face. Thank you, Chayton. Do not thank me, Chayton said, turning away. Just cut the wood straight. We are not beavers. It was not friendship, but it was peaceful. Josiah came over, laughing as he slapped Cal on the back. Look at that. You are practically family now. Next thing you know, he will be asking you to teach him how to play poker. I think he would cheat, Cal said, putting the tobacco in his pocket. He would definitely cheat, Josiah agreed. Listen, Cal, I'm heading out today, going back to my plot. With Pike in jail, I've got a farm to reclaim. My wife, she will be waiting. Go, Cal said, shaking Josiah's hand. You earned it. Josiah, you are a good man. And you, Josiah said, his face becoming serious. You are not the man you were. Cal, you are the man you are. Remember that. Josiah mounted his horse and rode out, tipping his hat to Siona as he passed. She watched him go, then turned to look at Cal. He was standing there, the axe in his hand, looking at the camp. He looked at the children playing with a hoop and stick. He looked at the women weaving baskets. He looked at the smoke rising into the clear blue sky. He belonged here. It was a strange thought, impossible a week ago. But the desert had a way of forging new shapes out of broken rocks. Siona walked over to him. The council met this morning, she said, and they have decided to send a delegation to Santa Fe to ensure the lawyers do not lose the paperwork. My father cannot go. Chayton is too angry. He would start a fight. Cal nodded. You need someone who knows the law. Someone who knows how to talk to heavy men in suits. Yes, Siona said. We need a guide, a scout. She looked at him, her dark eyes challenging him, inviting him. I am not a scout anymore, Siona, Cal said. No, she agreed. You are something else. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a new leather cord. She had braided it herself that morning, tight and strong. She held it out to him. You return the hawk, she said. But a man cannot walk without a totem. This is just leather. It has no magic, but it is strong. Cal took the cord. He tied it around his wrist, knotting it securely. I will go to Santa Fe, Cal said. I will make sure they read every page of that ledger. And then, Cal said, looking at the distant purple line of the horizon. I will come back, if I am welcome. Siona smiled. It was a true smile, one that reached her eyes and lit up her face like the morning sun on the red rocks. The fire will be lit, she said. She turned and walked back toward her father's tent, her head high. She did not look back, because she did not need to. She knew he was watching, and she knew for the first time in her life, that the man watching her was not a threat, but a promise kept. The wind blew through the canyon, no longer smelling of blood, but of sage, cedar, and the vast, terrifying, beautiful possibility of the future. The seasons in the high desert did not turn with the calendar. They turned with the wind. The biting cold of the Dragoon Mountains slowly gave way to the softer, pine-scented breezes of early spring. The temporary camp, once a cluster of desperate tents huddled against the stone, had begun to take on the shape of a village. It was not red mesa. The red earth was absent here, replaced by granite and gray shale. But the water from the mountain spring was sweet and constant. And for the first time in 3 years, the nights were quiet. There were no hoofbeats of patrolling soldiers, no distant rumble of mining blasts. Sayona stood at the entrance of the council lodge, a structure built of cedar poles and woven brush. She held a sheaf of papers in her hand, reports from the Indian agent, letters from the lawyers in Santa Fe, and supply manifests. She was no longer just the daughter of Chief Taza, the girl who rode horses and shot rifles. She had become the voice that spoke between the worlds. Her father sat inside, too frail now to ride, but his mind was still sharp. He relied on her eyes to read the white man's ink and on her judgment to separate the truth from the polite lies of bureaucrats. "The agent says we can plant corn in the lower valley," Sayona said, stepping into the sunlight where her brother Chayton was sharpening a skinning knife. "He says the soil survey is complete." Chayton looked up. The rage that had defined him for so long had not vanished, but it had cooled into a hard, useful iron. "And the water. The water is ours," Sayona replied. "The judge in Tucson denied Pike's appeal yesterday. The mining claim is void." Chayton nodded once, a sharp, satisfied motion. "Then we plant, but we keep the rifles clean. We always keep the rifles clean," she agreed. She walked down the path toward the spring. The camp was alive with activity. Women were grinding acorns. Children were chasing a stray dog, and men were building a stone wall to corral the horses. At the edge of the clearing, where the ground softened near the creek, a man was working. Cal Mercer was waist-deep in a pit he was digging, his shirt discarded on a nearby bush, his skin bronzed by the sun. He was swinging a pickaxe with a rhythmic, steady cadence. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. He was widening the catch basin for the spring, lining it with river stones to keep the water pure. He had returned from Santa Fe 2 weeks ago. He had ridden in quietly, delivered the news of the legal victory to Taza, and then, instead of saddling his horse to leave, he had picked up a shovel. He had not asked for payment. He had not asked for a place in the council. He had simply looked at the rocky ground and said, "You are going to need a better well if you want to water the stock through the summer," and he had started digging. Sayona watched him for a moment. He looked different than the man she had found bleeding in the canyon. The shadows under his eyes were gone. The desperation that had made him vibrate like a tensioned wire had been replaced by a calm solidity. He worked not like a man running from the past, but like a man building a foundation. He sensed her presence and stopped, leaning on the handle of the pickaxe. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with his forearm and looked up. "The wall is holding," he said, nodding toward the stones he had laid the day before. "The wall is good," Sayona said. "My father is pleased. He says you stack stones like a man who intends to stay until they gather moss." Cal smiled, a slow expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I have nowhere else to be, Sayona, and I have found that I like the taste of this water." "It is hard work," she said. "Harder than scouting. The Army pays $20 a month for a scout. Here, you get only stew and blisters." "I am done with the Army," Cal said, climbing out of the pit. He grabbed his shirt and wiped his face. "And $20 feels heavy when you earn it by betraying people. The stew tastes better." He walked over to where his canteen hung from a branch. "Besides, Josiah rode by this morning while you were in the council meeting." Sayona brightened. "Josiah? Is he well?" "Better than well," Cal said. "He brought a wagon load of seed corn. He said to tell you that the bank formally cleared his deed. He owns his land free and clear. He is planting alfalfa and says his wife is expecting another child in the autumn." "That is good news," Sayona said, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It was a small victory in a vast world, but it mattered. Justice does not always wear a badge. Sometimes it is just a man on his own land. Josiah calls it everyday justice, Cal said. He said Pike is still rotting in the county jail, screaming about conspiracies. No one is listening to him. Cal put his shirt on, buttoning it slowly. He looked at the sun, which was beginning to dip toward the western peaks. I finished the well, he said. The water will run clear by morning. Then you should wash, Sayona said. There is dust on you. Cal froze for a second, his hand on a button. He looked at her, and she saw the memory flash in his eyes, the memory of a different stream, a different sun, and a moment that had changed everything. I remember a time, Cal said softly. When you caught me washing, you were ready to shoot me. I was curious, Sayona corrected him, a playful light in her eyes. And you were very polite about it. I asked your name, Cal said. That was the moment. Sayona. When I asked your name, I stopped being a scout and started being me. Come, she said. Walk with me. They left the bustle of the camp and walked up the trail that led to a high ridge overlooking the valley. The sky was turning a deep, bruised purple, streaked with veins of gold. The wind picked up, rustling the needles of the ponderosa pines. They stopped at a flat rock that offered a view of the darkening world below. The fires of the camp looked like fallen stars. Sayona turned to face him. She reached up and touched the silver hawk pendant that rested against her throat. She had worn it every day since the night of the battle. You gave this back to me, she said. You said it was a debt paid. It was, Cal said. Your mother gave it to me to save my life. I gave it back to save yours. But a life saved is not a life lived, Sayona said. It is just the beginning. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a length of leather cord. It was new, braided from the hide of a deer Chayton had hunted, dyed with walnut shells to a deep, rich brown. At the end, she had tied 2 small beads of turquoise. She held it out to him. My mother gave you the hawk because you were a stranger who needed luck, she said. I give you this not because you are a stranger, and not because you need luck. Cal looked at the cord. Why then? Because you are a builder of wells, she said, and because you are the man who stood in front of the train for me. I give this to you as a choice. Cal Mercer. Not a debt. Cal took the cord. His fingers brushed hers, electric and warm. He did not tie it around his wrist immediately. He held it, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I made a choice a long time ago, Cal said. When I was lying in that cave, watching you fight your brother for my life. I chose you then. I just didn't think I was allowed to say it. You are allowed, Sayona whispered. Then I choose to stay, Cal said. I choose to dig the wells, mend the fences, and hunt the deer. I choose to stand between you and the wind, if the wind gets too cold. And I choose to do it as a free man. Not because I owe you, but because... He paused, searching for the words that would fit the vastness of the feeling. Because when I am with you, he finished, the silence doesn't scream anymore. Sayona stepped closer. She took the cord from his hand and tied it around his left wrist, pulling the knots tight. It is done, she said. You are bound to the tribe, and you are bound to me, but the knot is a slip knot. You can pull it free whenever you wish. Cal looked at the leather on his wrist. I will not pull it. He reached out and took her hand. This time, there was no hesitation. He pulled her gently toward him. They did not kiss. Not yet. In the Apache way, and in the way of 2 people who had seen too much death to rush life. They simply pressed their foreheads together. They breathed the same air. They shared the same warmth. Sayona, he whispered her name like a prayer. Cal, she answered. Below them, the camp settled into the rhythm of the night. A flute played somewhere in the distance. A mournful, beautiful sound that echoed off the granite walls. The smell of wood smoke and roasting meat drifted up. It was not a perfect world. The laws were still written by men who did not know the land. The winters would still be hard. Pike might be in jail, But there would always be other pikes, other men with ledgers and greed. But as Siona stood there on the ridge, feeling the strong, steady beat of Cal's heart against her own, she knew they would face it. They were no longer leaves blown by the wind. They were the roots. "Look," Cal said, pulling back slightly to point toward the east. The moon was rising, a massive, silver orb that illuminated a narrow trail winding out of the canyon and into the valley beyond. It was the trail they would take when the time came to return to Red Mesa, or to find a new place to call home. "The path is clear," Siona said. "It is a long road," Cal noted. "We have time," she said. "We have all the time in the world." They turned and stood side by side, watching the moon climb higher. The silver hawk at her throat caught the light, gleaming like a beacon. The leather cord at his wrist was dark and humble, a symbol of work and earth. Together, they looked toward the horizon, where the darkness met the stars. They did not know what lay beyond the next ridge, but they knew they would walk it together. And in the silence of the high desert, that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Siona and Cal as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale of the Wild West, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Hit that like button. And if you really want to support the channel and help this story reach more people, please smash that hype button. Your support means the world to me and helps keep these fireside stories burning. Thank you, and happy trails.